Okay, so buckle up because this deep dive is a wild one. We're talking Kamala Harris, just weeks before the 2024 election, sitting down with 60 Minutes. And it's not just your typical pre-election fluff piece, no way. We're talking Middle East tensions, a shaky economy. They
Mhm.
even get into her personal gun ownership. It's a lot.
Yeah, you're right about the timing. We're just weeks away from the election. This interview, it's strategically placed, gives Harris a real chance to connect with voters, show a different side of herself, especially when they're making up their minds.
Exactly. And they don't waste any time, do they? They jump right into the thick of it, the war in the Middle East, which, let's be real, is dominating every headline right now. Harris is calling for peace, obviously, but she's also emphasizing Israel's right to defend itself, which, I mean, talk about a tightrope walk, right? How do you even navigate that? Trying to be supportive, but also acknowledging the potential for civilian casualties.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in, for sure. 60 Minutes, they didn't let her off easy either. They
Yeah.
kept pressing her, especially about Netanyahu seemingly ignoring the U.S.'s pleas for restraint. And her response, it was interesting. She really hammered home the strength of that U.S.-Israeli alliance, but she kind of danced around the question of whether Netanyahu is actually listening to the U.S. at all. It
Ah,
really makes you wonder about the leverage the U.S. actually has in that situation.
it really does. Okay, let's shift gears here and talk about the economy because let's be honest, who isn't thinking about their wallets this close to an election, right? Harris is talking about those rising grocery prices, which, I mean, everyone's feeling the pinch there. She's proposing expanding that child tax credit, throwing in some tax breaks for first-time home buyers, small businesses. On paper, it sounds pretty good,
Yeah,
right?
sure, but there's a but, and it's a big one.
I figured there might be.
The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget,
Hmm.
they're nonpartisan. Just look at the numbers. Their estimate is this plan could add $3 trillion. That's trillion with a T
Hmm.
to the national debt. And that's just over the next decade.
Okay, yeah, that's a big but. So where's all that money coming from?
Well, according to Harris, it's time to tax the wealthy.
Ah, the classic strategy.
Right. It's a tale as old as time in politics.
Yeah.
But will it work this time? That's the question, isn't it? Especially in this current political climate. Congress is more divided than ever. It'll be a tough sell. The real question is, will it even put a dent in the deficit? And will voters buy it? It's a billion-dollar question, really. We could do a whole other deep dive just on that.
Totally. All right, so let's move on to immigration. Republicans, they've been all over the Biden-Harris administration, calling their approach inconsistent. And 60 Minutes, they did not shy away from that. They flat out asked if loosening those immigration policies back in 21 was a mistake, especially since, border crossings, they quadrupled afterwards. It wasn't subtle.
Yeah, it's one of those issues that's so layered, there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
You could see Harris getting a little defensive there. She kept pointing back to Congress, saying it's on them to finally pass some real, lasting immigration reform. She even brought up that bipartisan bill that supposedly died on Trump's desk, arguing that, if that had passed, things would be different.
But 60 Minutes, they kept pushing back, right? They were
Yeah.
basically like, look, this happened under your watch. How'd she handle that?
She talked about their efforts to strengthen the border,
Yeah.
increasing security, working with other countries to get to the root of the problem, things like that. She was adamant that they've made real progress in cutting down on illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking since they took office. But she kept coming back to the need for a long-term solution. And for her, that means Congress has to act. It's pretty classic political strategy when you think about it. Own the progress, but remind everyone you can't fix a broken system by yourself.
Right, right. Okay, we're getting into some crickier territory now. Race and Donald Trump. 60 Minutes did not hold back, bringing up Harris's past accusations of racism against Trump, those comments about Haitians, birtherism, Charlottesville, it's heavy stuff. And they ask her how she squares those accusations with the fact that millions of Americans still support him. I mean, how do you even respond to that?
It's a question that really gets at the heart of what's going on in America right now, this deep polarization we're seeing. Harris, she talked about the kind of leadership she thinks America needs, someone who unites, not divides. It's a powerful message, definitely. But does it really address the complexities of race and identity in America today? Like, does it resonate with those who feel like they've been ignored, even those who are drawn to Trump's rhetoric? I don't know. That's the question that sticks with me.
It's something a lot of us are grappling with around him. Speaking of unexpected turns, can we talk about Liz Cheney endorsing Harris? This is a woman who, like just a few years ago, was one of Trump's biggest critics. Now she's out there on the campaign trail with Kamala Harris. What a world.
Right. It's crazy. You almost have to pinch yourself. It really makes you wonder, if those old political dividing lines even mean anything anymore.
I know. Imagine hearing this even just a couple years ago. What do you think this says about where U.S. politics are right now?
Oh, it's definitely a sign of the times. It seems like we're in this era of political realignment, you know what I mean? The traditional party lines, they're getting blurry. We're seeing people find common ground, even on these really divisive issues. Though who knows if this kind of cross-party thing will even last past this election.
Right. Who knows? Okay, well, back to the interview itself. They move on to Ukraine next, another one of those topics you just can't avoid these days. Harris, she takes a pretty firm stance, says she wouldn't meet with Putin one-on-one, and emphasizes that Ukraine has to be involved in any peace talks. No question about it.
Yeah, it's such a delicate balance to strike, isn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. wants to support Ukraine, obviously, but there's always that risk of getting pulled into a bigger conflict with Russia.
Hmm.
It seems like her whole approach here is about projecting strength, resolve, both to Russia and to our allies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, of course, they had to get into China. Harris really stressed that the U.S. needs to stay competitive, particularly on the economic front, which, I mean, it's a big talking point.
Oh, for sure. It's something a lot of voters are thinking about, especially anyone who's been personally affected by, say, jobs moving overseas or just feels like the economy isn't working for them. It's a smart message for her to hit, reminding people she's going to fight for American jobs and interests on that global stage.
Okay, get ready for this one because this is where things get interesting. 60 Minutes brings up a statement Harris made recently about owning a gun. And not only that, but that she'd be willing to use it to defend her home.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal, especially with gun control being such a hot button issue these days.
Absolutely, especially in this political climate. It's the kind of statement that could really fire up both sides, those who support her and those who don't.
Definitely. So she seems a little taken aback by it, but she confirms that she owns a Glock, has even used it at a shooting range. What do you make of that?
It's a bold move, that's for
Mhm.
sure. It's hard to say how it's going to play out. I mean, it might resonate with some moderate voters who maybe aren't on board with stricter gun control policies, but then you have to think about those who might see it as contradicting the Democratic Party's stance on gun control. It's a gamble, no doubt about it. Only time will tell how it plays out.
For sure. So we also get to hear from Harris's running mate in this interview, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. Now, his opponents have been labeling him as radical left, but he really pushes back against that in this interview.
Yeah, he does. And he does it by focusing on what his policies actually do, the concrete impacts. Like he talks about making sure kids are getting breakfast and lunch at school and guaranteeing paid family and medical leave. He even points out that a lot of these policies have support from the business community, which I thought was interesting.
It's a good strategy. It takes the conversation away from those abstract labels and makes it about real-world results that people can connect with.
Exactly. It lets him appeal to a much wider range of people, even those who might be turned off by the radical label, but who can get behind policies that improve people's everyday lives.
Okay, but we have to address the weird comment.
Oh, right. Yeah. For those who didn't catch that, Walz had made a comment before calling Republicans weird for their stance on certain social issues.
Exactly. And understandably, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So how'd he handle it when 60 Minutes brought it up?
He tries to clarify it, saying that he was criticizing their policies, not them personally. And that's a tough distinction to make. He really emphasizes that he believes in respectful dialogue, even when there are strong disagreements.
It is a fine line to walk criticizing someone's views without it coming off as disrespectful or dismissive, right? Do you think his explanation will be enough for the people who were offended by that initial comment?
It's tough to say. I think it just goes to show how, in our current political climate, it's so charged that even one word can be taken out of context and blown completely out of proportion.
Oh, for sure. It makes you wonder how anyone can even navigate it. Now, one thing that struck me was how Trump decided to decline an interview with 60 Minutes. I mean, here's Harris. She's putting herself out there, answering these tough questions weeks before the election. Trump's like, nope, not doing it.
It's a stark contrast, isn't it?
Mm?
You've got Harris engaging, even when it's about uncomfortable topics, and then you have Trump just opting out altogether.
Ah.
It really feeds into the story that each campaign wants to tell, doesn't it? You've got Harris as this transparent, experienced leader, someone who's willing to face the music, so to speak. And then you have Trump, who comes across as avoiding accountability.
Yeah, it paints a picture. It does paint a picture for sure. And it makes you think about the strategy there.
Yeah, for sure. And, speaking of strategy, this whole interview, it feels very deliberate, right? Like it was crafted to present Harris's vision, her plan for America, just as voters are getting ready to head to the polls.
Yeah.
But the question is, did it work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we covered a lot of ground. The war in the Middle East, the economy, immigration, even that whole thing about her owning a gun.
Right. And don't forget about her running mate, Tim Walz, trying to redefine himself, get away from that radical left label. He definitely made some interesting points.
He did. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the voters. So for anyone listening who's still undecided, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from this interview?
Ooh, that's the big one, isn't it? Honestly, I think what stood out to me most was how much Harris was trying to walk this really fine line. Appealing to a broad range of people while still taking a firm stance on certain issues. It's like she's trying to be everything to everyone, which is a tough thing to pull off, especially these days when things are so polarized.
It's like trying to thread a needle with all
Exactly.
these different issues, all these different groups of people she's trying to reach. So as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Pay attention to the details. Don't just go by the headlines or the sound bites. Really dig into what's being said and what's not being said. This interview, it gave us a glimpse into Harris's vision, but it's up to each of us to decide what we make of it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Oh, that was quite a ride, wasn't it? This deep dive into Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview had it all: foreign policy, the economy, personal revelations, you name it. We hope you feel as informed as possible going into this election season. Remember to stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, get out there and make your voice heard.